Okay, so I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and we're going to try to catch an interview here with Bob Fiske, Robert Fiske. Bob Fiske. Okay, with Bob Fiske. And this is the preliminary to the interview. So, Bob, tell us who you are and why you're coming forward at this time.
Okay, well, I'm a Mufon investigator who lives in Vail, Colorado. I'm also a lifetime Mufon member. I've had a long-term history in UFOs, and I joined Mufon about 2000 when I decided to take it up as a serious hobby. And I've been an investigator for them. I've done about 36 investigations for Mufon, and I'm also been in law enforcement and security for almost 30 years now, and been trained in investigations in that. But it all happened back in March of 2012 when I was at my job in Vail, which is as a security officer, and I was outside. It was a nice day in March, mostly blue skies, and looking to the east, I saw a UFO. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind almost from the get-go of what I was seeing. It was maybe a mile away and about 500 feet off the ground. It had two intensely bright lights, like headlights that were sparkling, and made it so bright that I could only see a dark object behind it. And the object descended to about 1,000 feet when it suddenly just vanished on me, which is something UFOs do a lot. So I dutifully filed a report with MUFON the next day, and a day or so later I received an email questionnaire from the investigator who was assigned the case, and I later found out this was the Assistant State Director for Colorado MUFON, and I was kind of surprised, and why I got the why you send an email questionnaire, because the most important part of our investigations is doing in-person interviews. They're the best way to establish witness credibility, in my feeling, and so I was kind of confused about it, especially the first line of my narrative I put in that I was a MUFON field investigator, and I kind of at least expected him maybe to call to say hi. Seeing as how I work weekends on my job, so I rarely make it down to the meetings, but that hasn't been a problem, I guess, so far. Nobody said I had to come to the meetings, but...
Okay, hold on 1 minute. I'm going to stop you right there. Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and we're here with Robert Fiske. He's explaining about his experience with MUFON. He's been a MUFON investigator for how many years?
Well, 14. I joined in 2000. It was a couple years later before I took my exam, but at least a good 10 years or more.
Wow, yeah, and he also has, as he's mentioned, a background in law enforcement. So he's had some strange sort of interactions with MUFON over the last, 2 years?
Over the last 2 years, yeah. And
okay.
Well, I'll start with my sighting report, which
sure.
I had a sighting report in March of 2012 near where I work. I was at work at the time, and it was a good UFO sighting. I do have a kind of a picture of it if you can see some of that, but the object was about a mile off and about 500 feet off the ground when I first saw it, and it rose to about 1,000 feet, and then it just vanished right in front of me. And knowing what I do about UFOs, I said that was a good sighting. I filed a report with MUFON the next day. 2 days later, I received an email questionnaire from the field investigator assigned to investigate my case, and I thought it was kind of strange at the time because we're supposed to do personal interviews with witnesses, and I thought, as I put in my narrative of my report on the first line, I put I am a MUFON investigator from, so I was kind of surprised I didn't get a call from him, but I filled out the questionnaire and sent it back to him, and didn't hear anything else back. But about some weeks later, I was looking in the CMS, the incident reporting, and at my case, and I found out that without any investigation at all, the investigator declared that I was either seeing a commercial aircraft or hallucinating, which really kind of took me. So I emailed an investigator back, who I found out was the assistant state director for Colorado Mufon, and he never emailed me back or called me. I asked him to call me, and he never called me back. He did eventually email me at one time, but during the course of waiting for him to respond to my emails or get a call from him, I was looking through CMS, and I found out that sending out these email questionnaires, they were like form letters being sent to witnesses. And I feel, you know, if somebody makes a report to Mufon on a UFO, he at least deserves a good investigation of it. And that includes, you know, the investigator calling these people. And like I say, it's the best way to establish credibility. Witness credibility is doing interviews in person, and you can't do that over the phone. So, but I noticed that there were many reports being filed that all it looked like they were doing, sending out these email questionnaires. Now, the state director had concentrated all investigations in the hands of just 4 investigators, which was himself, the assistant state director, and I think the assistant state director's wife, and another investigator. From the time I was looking between January 1st and into June, there were something like 72 reports received by Colorado Mufon, of which these 4 investigators handled 70 of them. And there was no listing of any secondary investigators being involved, even though the state director says, oh, we have teams, we're leading teams of investigators. I found nothing in the narratives saying that there were other investigators involved in these investigations. Apparently, again, all I was seeing was email questionnaires, and even where there were phone numbers given for the witnesses, it showed no attempt at calling them. And you know, I know enough about what's a good investigation and what isn't these days, and after my experience, and sending out an email questionnaire is no investigation at all. But the state director was, when I finally emailed him, because I wasn't getting a response from the field investigator, he was telling me how these are good investigations we're doing, and how he stood by the assistant state director's investigation, which wasn't any. He said I could be investigated by email, interviewed by email. That was one of the funny lines. He took during this exchange, I found out that he had also put me on inactive, where I wasn't getting any new cases, and he had done that the previous fall, I guess, of 2011. And when I asked him, you know, why was I put on inactive, and this was done without my knowledge or permission, and when I asked him that, he essentially lied and said I had asked for this.
Wow.
And then he changed his story, and then he said, well, I was having personal problems. And that's a long story, but I had only met him once at the symposium, 2011 symposium, and at the time there were some things going on in my life that was kind of disrupting, but I didn't ask, you know, to be cut out of that. But he used that as an excuse, I guess, the next time, saying that, you know, I was having personal problems, I guess, in his opinion, that made me ineligible to, you know, be a field investigator.
Okay.
And finally,
Everyone that has personal
you know,
problems.
finally he comes up with, and I've got this in the email here, and I'd like to read it.
Okay, go right ahead.
So anyway, finally he justified it, saying that it is my prerogative as state director to make any FI inactive at any time and for any reason that seems good to me. He says, I do not need to consult, notify, or obtain your permission to do this.
Okay, interesting.
Now, I requested, I said, where does it say in the Mufon manual you have the power to do this? And it took him like 9 months to send me a listing of what it says there. And it says nothing, page 17 of the Mufon State Director's Handbook. Basically, it says they are expected to counsel or otherwise properly correct their staff if a violation of Mufon policy or investigative protocol. And the state director to include additional training, demotions, or dismissals of their state officer. The field investigators can handle most cases of misconduct. And it says, however, a notification must be sent to the Director of Investigations, which I doubt that he did on any of this. But there's nothing in it that says he has the power to suspend me or expel me or use his own personal
Especially
feelings
without
on it.
notifying you, that just seems, wrong.
Yeah, well,
in
to
any
me it was
organization.
deceitful, dishonest, and unethical, and
Doesn't
unprofessional.
give you a
so.
chance to defend yourself or.
Yeah, and I started sending appeals to Mufon headquarters, to the international director. Never got a reply for over a year from, who was the last international director? I can't think of his name. But I felt I had grounds for a lawsuit against the state director. I think he acted on purely personal reasons and went against, exceeded his authority. So I mentioned that in an email to the international director, and finally he responded, and but wouldn't do anything. He promised he would maybe investigate my original sighting report, reinvestigate it, but that never happened. And then Jan Hartson took over at the last meeting, and at the last symposium, he became the international director. And I did email Jan a couple weeks ago and asking him to look at this thing again, and no reply. So.
Okay, well, so this is very interesting. I'm just curious, up until like 2011, when you had, or exactly when you had the sighting, had you had any other problems sort of in Mufon or with?
Well, the other state director, and mind you, I live up in the area of Colorado where there's a lot of sightings, Eagle County. We've had a lot of them over the years, some interesting cases and things that I've heard. The last state director, Leslie Barnacle, let me do my own investigation. Apparently she trusted me to be credible, and that I was somebody that, she believed I saw what I saw, and in every case, I'm sure I was seeing good UFOs, alien craft, in most of in all of my reports. I think even some of the ones where I'm not sure, and there's been a lot of them up there, don't even report anymore unless I'm positive, that I've seen.
So in other words, but when you say your reports, are you saying that you are the one who actually saw the sighting, or that somebody else saw the sighting and then you went and interviewed them?
Well, both. Some were other people's sightings. There were maybe half a dozen or so over the year that were mine.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, and is that usual for Mufon investigators to have sightings of their own?
Well, I would think so. I think there'd be something to get you interested, generally, is having a good sighting to begin with. I can't imagine anybody wanting to join Mufon who at least didn't believe that UFOs were real.
Okay, so you, in other words, during your 10 years with Mufon, you had a number of sightings. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
But was this particular sighting unique in some way?
Well, the shape of the craft was unique. I hadn't seen anything like that before, even though I've seen them in pictures. It looked like two big sparkling headlights.
Yeah.
Bright lights with a dark object behind it. I've seen these in photos and drawings and other videos. More recently, there was one that they showed on the Fact or Fate show about a UFO. They had some video of one that was videoed over Gulfport, Mississippi, that looked like the one I saw.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so again, just putting this up there for people to see. So it's distinctly after this sighting that things kind of went pear-shaped with Mufon?
Yeah.
Okay, and you started being treated in a very unusual way.
Unprofessionally, for one thing. I mean, I feel I had a valid complaint about the quality of the investigation. Again, sending out an email questionnaire is not doing an investigation. And
but your other sightings, did they also investigate those other sightings, or was it because you were supposedly no longer involved with MUFON at the time that you had this sighting?
Well, I didn't know. I had
You
been
didn't know you weren't involved.
inactive. And like I said, the previous state director, if I reported a sighting, she accepted that that it was a good
Okay,
sighting.
so, but nobody ever sent you a questionnaire in the past or things
No,
like that?
and I thought that was, again, highly unusual because.
So nobody tried to interview you? I mean, just even, here you are, a member of this organization. How many members are there do you know, like roughly how many people are members of I don't know, first
In
of all.
Colorado?
Yeah,
I'm
in
not
Colorado.
really sure now. I
You
mean,
don't know.
unfortunately, like I say, I wasn't able to make the meetings over the years because I've always been working this job on the weekends.
Right, and your job was a security guard, is that correct?
Security officer, yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. So, was there a change in Mufon, would you say, since 2011 or 2010, which might have?
Well, again, very strange, and we're talking about in the way possibly government agencies working in Mufon. But back in some years back, Cliff who took over after James Carey, and James Carey, if you remember, worked for the NSA before becoming international director.
Right.
And he was kind of asked to leave, I guess I was told, because I think people came to believe he wasn't working in Mufon's best interest. And after that, Cliff took over, and Cliff's a very affable guy, but he was the one, he fired Leslie Barnacle as state director, and that, again, kind of created a little uproar, because I guess he fired a couple of them at the same time who had been longtime state directors, and Leslie, I thought, did a hell of a job. She was doing the symposium for many years, and I liked her, and it was Cliff who put in the current state director, and that kind of bothered me, thinking back on it now, it's kind of, I wonder why Leslie got fired, or.
So you never heard any back channel talk about why these
No,
firings went on?
as I remember, nothing on the internet, they were very hush-hush.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
What about when isn't Mufon, don't they have like an overhead? In other words, every state has a Mufon and there's a state director, but then there's somebody above all of them? Like across the United States, is there
Well,
one?
there was the international director, and then there's the board of directors.
I see.
And again, I'm not even sure who is all on it right now. I'd like to look at, find out
Well, it
the
might be
names. I've been
interesting.
trying to get their attention because one thing, the rules, need to be changed. They need to be more specific as far as what a state director can do. And certainly he has to be professional. And if I did anything wrong professionally, which I didn't, he could take action against me. But using his personal feelings, nah. It shouldn't.
Right,
Shouldn't
absolutely.
have the option there.
Okay, have you got any friends within the MUFON sort of organization itself that report to you things going on from time to time?
No, unfortunately, I don't. I had. I don't really know anybody because, like I say, I don't attend the meetings. I think at the time I was put on inactive, and before that, I think I was the only field investigator on the west slope of Colorado, west of the Divide, because Leslie was giving me pretty much all the sighting reports down there. And again, it seems, why put me on inactive if you'd got an experienced investigator in that area? Why do it? And
did they replace you with anyone that you're aware of? Did they replace you? In other words, you said you're the only one in that area.
No, I did notice that there was one report up nearby in the Glenwood Springs area, which is not that far from Vail. And I remember it was assigned to the same investigator who did mine, the assistant state director. And I remember thinking at the time, we must have a new field investigators up this way, giving them an assignment. But it turns out he lives in, I guess, Colorado Springs. So,
wow, that's far away.
Yeah.
So pretty hard to investigate something if you live that far away from the
Yeah,
crimes.
and, for me, sending out email questionnaires indicates that they already have a preconceived conclusion that, this isn't worth investigating. And like I said, most of them turned out as IFOs, identified flying objects. There were a few that were listed as insufficient data, but
So are you able to sort of give, like, over a period of time, you say that were you able to see any records of how many sightings and then what group of them were categorized in a certain way?
well, I saw a lot of them. I started writing down numbers of some of them,
Okay.
and but I was seeing so many sighting reports that were being listed as IFOs.
So if it's an IFO, they means
They identified it
recognize what it
as
is.
a commercial aircraft or weather balloon or something like that.
Interesting, okay. Yeah, I mean, you know, of course I'm Camelot, I'm always looking at the larger conspiracies of things, right? So if you've got something going on here, you've got a sort of shuffling of the people that are in charge, and that happened was it in 2011, are we saying, or? Where the people, you said that this woman Leslie was fired, and you said there were a few firings.
Yeah, that was probably.
What year was that? Do you know?
I'm thinking around maybe 2010 or something, but I'm not 100% sure right now.
Okay. All right, well, maybe we can check that, you know, later. But, so you're saying there was a changing, though, and then this guy, you called him Clifford Cliff?
Cliff, it was, yeah. He was head of international director after Kerrigan for a number of years. I think maybe about 3 years there. So.
But is he the current international director?
No, the current international director is Jan Hartson, who's head of Orange County, Mufon, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And
he's always seemed like a fair guy. I talked to him
at
conferences, but you know, he didn't get back with my email, so it's kind of.
Interesting. You know, there's a speaker here from Mufon this weekend, isn't there?
Robert Powell.
Yeah.
Oh, I got up in the questions section and asked him flat out, do you think the NSA is working in Mufon right now? And I told him my feelings, you know, that I feel positively. I went through some of the history of, you know, government snooping and getting involved in there. And, you know, mentioned Kerrigan and everything, and he kind of said, well, maybe there was, and, you know, but, you know, I don't think there is anymore. And he said something about having any proof, and I said, well, I don't have any proof, but, you know, the NSA doesn't, hey, here I am, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't tell you.
Right. Okay, well, this is very interesting. I'm still puzzled because you're saying you made these reports all along. You know, you did these investigations for over 10 years, and then suddenly everything sort of falls apart when you have this sighting.
Yeah, because not so much a sighting, but again, when I saw what kind of
how you were treated,
investigation or non-investigation that they were doing on this.
Yeah. When exactly was the sighting, and then was the response? If you could give me the exact dates of that, do you know?
Well, I might have it written down here. I think
it would just be interesting to see. I mean, obviously, you know the whole thing with Edward Snowden and the disclosures about the NSA and where things are going. Needless to say, they not so long ago they built that new facility in the Salt Lake.
Yeah, I had the sighting on March 10th, 2012. I think it was about 3:15 in the afternoon.
All right.
I reported it. That was on a Saturday. I reported it on the 11th, the Sunday, and got the email, I think, just 2 days later on the 12th.
Okay, and then once you got the email, which was a questionnaire,
questionnaire,
did you actually fill out the questionnaire?
Yeah.
Okay, and you sent it back in, and then they nothing else, and you
Nothing
then found out it was
happened.
classified as an IFO, as you call it, or having been a
hallucination.
Hallucination.
Yeah,
And
we're
when
ridiculing witnesses now, so that's what the Air Force
incredible. Yeah. But when approximately what month was the classification when you found out that it?
Well, I went back. It was beginning of June, I believe, when I was checking back, and I was kind of wondering why I hadn't gotten any reports or assignments up that way, and I was checking to see if there were any sightings up my way, and I looked at my sighting from the 10th, and that's when I discovered, that he had concluded it was, either an aircraft or hallucinations.
Now, this is a database, is that correct, that
Yeah.
they've got? And is this open to the public?
Parts of it, not the investigative part.
Really? That's
The
interesting.
initial reports are usually open to the public, and you can go and classify and find out how many there are, but to get in and find out what the investigator determined.
Oh, really? They don't publish, what conclusions they've come to about the sighting?
No, otherwise I would have been looking in there and trying to get some more information for my.
That's actually quite interesting in and of itself.
That I got cut
because-
off too,
Right.
that was.
Well, I mean, we're actually doing this on purpose because I myself, have, as Project Camelot, have gotten a lot of sort of off-channel information about Mufon as being a highly, managed organization, managed by various intelligence agencies. Certainly believable that NSA would be one of them. But
I just use them as a cover for any government agency, I guess. I think
Okay.
it's probably the NSA who probably has the most interest in MUFON, though.
Yeah, okay. But this piece of information is quite interesting if you think about it, because, in other words, if you want to think of it as there's a sighting, and then there's an investigation, and then there's a conclusion, but you're saying the conclusion about the sighting is never published, so that the public does not know whether, unlike you, who found out, that their sighting was then classified as, IFO or nonsense or swamp gas, or they could classify it as anything, right? So what we're talking about are records that are not public knowledge, and therefore it's suspect. Their conclusions could be suspect. There's no place of appeal, for example, where a person could say, hey, reached the wrong conclusion, and why. So it is interesting in terms of the history of UFO sightings, and that this is one of the major organizations where people tend to go. Would you say?
Again, as I wrote in that one piece I gave you, we would be a target for these people. And the government decided that, long ago, to have the American public learn the truth about UFOs is a threat to national security. So any organization, a person, or group that is trying to do this naturally becomes a target for them. And I think we would be, like I say, very naive and even stupid to not admit that they would have people in there. I mean, I'm convinced there's people in MUFON now that are probably working for the NSA or one of those groups. Just who they are and how many of them, I don't know, but I certainly suspect this. I mean, what the people in Colorado MUFON were doing was the same thing the Air Force used to do. They weren't doing good investigations, ridiculing witnesses, ignoring credible witnesses, trying to come up with quick explanations. It's a government operation.
Yeah.
That's, they're just trying to explain away as many as possible. So maybe when somebody calls me, if I'm looking for statistics, we explained away all but about 6% of them, which is what the Air Force used to say,
Right.
6%.
And that's what they go public with, and so of course people think most people are crazy. This is fascinating. I also wonder, though, a person like you who had a background in law enforcement, even before you got involved in doing investigations, right, for MUFON, and we're talking, you said 10 years, at least 10 years, even longer, right, before you actually signed up to be an investigator?
Well, it went a few years. I mean, I've been an investigator, I think, for at least 10 years.
Okay.
But it took me a few to get through the manual. And I was reading books on the subject because, like I say, I'd kind of been on the fringes of UFOs, but when I decided to take it up as a serious hobby in 2000, that's when I got my first PC and got online and got to all the good websites and learned what was going on. I mean, I started reading books and trying to catch up on everything. So there was kind of a time before I took the exam,
Right.
I've been doing it, I think, 10 years. I've gotten some.
Okay, but during those 10 years, were you, in other words, were you getting indications that there might be something going on? In other words, you seem to have kind of kept to yourself. You seem to have done your own investigations. You say the state director back then seemed to treat you well, and you felt that there was an openness.
She actually sent an email saying that to somebody else, but I got a copy of it where she said that considered me one of her best investigators.
Okay. And at that time, how were those sightings classified? Do you know?
Mine?
Yeah, the ones back in those 10 years.
Well, the sightings I had, they varied. I mean, some I did identify, natural object, a planet
Right.
or something. Some, and unfortunately, sometimes you get a person who makes a report, but you can't get in touch with them to do an interview.
Sure.
And I've had a few of those ones that on paper seemed like real good reports. And unfortunately, they wouldn't call me back or
Right.
I never made contact. So those became like insufficient data.
I see.
Were classified at that. The remainder I had were all really good reports of alien craft.
Okay.
Some of them were really good too.
Excellent,
And, close encounters type stuff. And
Okay. But in terms of the people or the treatment that you got in those years leading up to this kind of sort of incident.
well, fine. Nobody ever said
You
anything.
didn't
Leslie
notice
never sent
anything
an email
over-
saying
Yeah.
or I need you to come to the meetings. That would be nice or something. I tried to make all the symposiums, especially when they were in Denver. I made all of them because they were right close by.
Yeah.
To where I live, and I went to a couple in Orange County, but
Great. Well, all right. Well, this is really, really interesting, I have to say. And obviously, this is going to go on the web. And
yeah, there's a lot of good people in Mufon who are doing good investigations. If there's people in there who aren't for reasons we can only speculate at that are doing things and not working in Mufon's best interest, and we need to get them out of there and get back to doing good investigations. And I hope to be back doing investigations again someday. That even if it does take a lawsuit, I think, to get myself reestablished and back in there.
well, this is wonderful, and you're quite brave, I would say, coming forward in this way.
I was a Chicago policeman. Yeah, I did that for 10
Well, so
years.
that you're
So,
the right
yeah.
person for the
Yeah.
job, so to speak.
So I don't scare easy, but I was
All right.
it was funny, after I called you and, gee, maybe the NSA doesn't want me to talk about this, but
Yeah.
it's fine. So,
Okay.
I don't-
All right. Well, I guess we can wrap this up unless you have something else that you would like to add.
Well, only I'd like to see Mufon become a good organization again and be dedicated to doing good investigations on UFOs and hoping to solve the problem and ending UFO secrecy.
There you go. All right. Thank you, Bob Fiske.
Okay, Carrie, thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Knowing what I do about UFOs, I said, that was a good sighting. I filed a report with MUFON the next day. 2 days later, I received an email questionnaire from the field investigator assigned to investigate my case. And I thought it was kind of strange at the time because we're supposed to do personal interviews with witnesses. And I thought, as I put in my narrative of my report on the first line, I put I am a MUFON investigator from, so I was kind of surprised I didn't get a call from him, but I filled out the questionnaire and sent it back to him and didn't hear anything else back. But about some weeks later, I was looking in the CMS, the incident reporting, and at my case, and I found out that without any investigation at all, the investigator declared that I was either seeing in a commercial aircraft or hallucinating, which really kind of took me, so I emailed. That hasn't been a problem, I guess, so far. Nobody said I had to come to the meetings, but...
Okay, hold on 1 minute. I'm going to stop you right there. Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and we're here with Robert Fiske. He's explaining about his experience with Mufon. He's been a Mufon investigator for how many years?
Well, 14. I joined in 2000. It was a couple years later before I took my exam, but at least a good 10 years or more.
Wow, yeah, and he also has, as he's mentioned, a background in law enforcement. So but he's had some strange sort of interactions with Mufon over the last, what, 2 years?
Over the last 2 years, yeah. And
Okay.
well, I'll start with my sighting report, which
Sure.
I had a sighting report in March of 2012 near where I work. I was at work at the time, and it was a good UFO sighting. I do have a kind of a picture of it, if you can
Great, yeah.
see some of that. But the object was about a mile off and about 500 feet off the ground when I first saw it, and it rose to about 1,000 feet, and then it just vanished right in front of me. And intensely bright lights, like headlights that were sparkling, and made it so bright that I can only see a dark object behind it. And the object descended to about 1,000 feet when it suddenly just vanished on me, which is something UFOs do a lot. So I dutifully filed a report with MUFON the next day. And a day or so later, I received an email questionnaire from the investigator who was assigned the case. And I later found out this was the assistant state director for Colorado MUFON. And I was kind of surprised, and why I got why you send an email questionnaire, because the most important part of our investigations is doing in-person interviews. They're the best way to establish witness credibility, in my feeling. And so I was kind of confused about it, especially the first line of my narrative I put in that I was a MUFON field investigator. And I kind of at least expected him maybe to call to say hi. Seeing as how I work weekends on my job, so I rarely make it down to the meetings, but
Okay, so I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and we're going to try to catch an interview here with Bob Fiske, Robert Fiske. Bob Fiske. Okay, with Bob Fiske, and this is the preliminary to the interview. So, Bob, tell us who you are and why you're coming forward at this time.
okay. Well, I'm a MUFON investigator who lives in Vail, Colorado. I'm also a lifetime MUFON member. I've had a long-term history in UFOs, and I joined MUFON about 2000 when I decided to take it up as a serious hobby. And I've been an investigator for them. I've done about 36 investigations for MUFON, and I'm also been in law enforcement and security for almost 30 years now, and been trained in investigations in that. But it all happened back in March of 2012 when I was at my job in Vail, which is as a security officer, and I was outside. It was a nice day in March, mostly blue skies, and looking to the east, I saw a UFO. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind almost from the get-go of what I was seeing. It was maybe a mile away and about 500 feet off the ground. It had